Hey everybody, John Malanka here, United Patients Group, and just did a podcast with a doctor that I had never met before, Dr. Aliffe. And man, is he talented, and you're going to enjoy this topic. We talk for everything from cannabis, the different terpenes, cannabinoids, his background. I'll just give you a little tip here, a little tidbit here. He earned his BA from Harvard University in Organic and Medicinal Chemistry and MD in Distinguished Honors from Stanford University School of Medicine. He did the MD, PhD training program in cancer biology, departments of molecular pharmacology, as well as chemical and systems biology, and then did his postgraduate clinical training from Stanford as well, and anesthesiology, and as well as intensive care and pain management. If you have never seen him or heard him talk, Dr. Aliffe, here it is. And so happy and proud that he's on our show. So enjoy it. Please like us, comment, share. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. It does help us and our channel, as well as you, our community, to get this information out. So enjoy. Thank you. Bye-bye. Hey everybody, John Malanka, United Patients Group. Be informed and be well, and excited about this next guest here, Dr. Aliffe. Dr. Aliffe, how are you?
Good. How you doing, John?
So first name, Kary, like Karyemaitre. How do you pronounce it? Correct.
Karyemaitre, kind of like in that cartoon movie Toy Story. The character Tomater, imagine him telling McQueen, "It's a car you met the other day."
Karyemaitre Aliffe.
Yeah, Karyemaitre Aliffe. Aliffe like a cannabis leaf.
Yep. And where is your family originally from?
I don't know, all over the place. I have part Cherokee, I have Creole, I have, Egyptian, and I don't know, all sorts of things. I have to do 23andMe one day to nail it down and figure out how much Scandinavian there is or something.
A little of everything. Heinz 54, whatever.
Cosmopolitan.
Yeah, exactly. Well, good to have you on, Dr. Aliffe. And let me read this impressive bio. So your parents must be very proud about this one. Dr. Aliffe earned his BA from Harvard University in Organic and Medicinal Chemistry, and MD with Distinguished Honors, magna cum laude, from Stanford University School of Medicine, MD PhD training program in cancer biology, departments of molecular pharmacology, chemical and systems biology. His postgraduate clinical training, also from Stanford, is in anesthesiology with intensive care as well as pain management. So you're down in Silicon Valley for quite some times now. You're up there in
the other Silicon Valley.
The other Silicon Valley, Seattle, Washington area, right?
Yeah.
And so welcome. I appreciate you coming on. Pleasure to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Good to have you on. And we have a mutual friend, Dr. Jake Felice, who I've done a few things with, and he's been on this show. So if any of you have not seen Jake's interview that we've had, check out our podcast section, and you'll also see why these two guys are friends, I'm assuming. So
yeah, Jake's a great guy.
Good dude. So, well, you have a lot to share. We've been on the phone for quite some time before we hit record, and so a lot to cover. The topic that you were looking at is a fresh look at hemp and cannabis, clarifying misconceptions about one of the greatest medicines in nature's pharmacy. And so you want to talk about what some of the things that you're just start clarifying these misconceptions and how, first off, let's go back and how does a doctor from Harvard get into the cannabis industry and Stanford get into the cannabis industry up in Washington, one of the hot spots?
Well, it's a really long story. I'll see if I can distill it down into just kind of some super critical extract. So my start in medicine had to do with, as I mentioned in our call, that my mother passed away from metastatic breast cancer when I was a kid, when I was 11. And I'd always had an interest in chemistry. When I went to college, I was persuaded by some friends to be pre-med under the premise that in order to do cancer research, you really had to be an MD, because I was planning to just do a PhD. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I became disenchanted with biology because at the time, this was before all of the breakthrough DNA sequencing and all of that. And there was it wasn't precise enough for me. And so I ended up majoring in organic and medicinal chemistry, but still maintaining an interest in the cancer biology and carcinogenesis as a process in general. So when I was 19, I started doing cancer research with a professor there, Professor Winder and his group, and looking at a family of compounds that are referred to as tumor-promoting agents, meaning that once you have a malignant cell, what causes it to grow and grow and grow out of control? In the model, what's called stage 2 carcinogenesis, there's the initiation, which is the mutation step, and then there's a promotion phase that causes the tumor to grow out of control, which is really the primary issue when it comes to health for a cancer patient. So around about this same time was when Dr. Candace Pert had the breakthrough discovery that there were endogenous morphine compounds in the human body. And so the whole concept of endorphins and enkephalins and all of that, but more so the concept that a plant that grows in some remote area actually has, as they used to call the lock and key, has a key to a very specific function in the human body, in the human nervous system, in the brain. And that completely blew me away. I thought that was the most amazing thing that I'd ever heard, because to me, it's like, you know, imagine you go to some small village in northeastern Thailand and, you know, you see somebody walking along and they drop a key out of their pocket. And you try to catch the person, but they're gone. They get on a bus. You don't speak the language. You decide to just keep it. And you come home, and when you get home, you just think, oh, hey, wouldn't that be funny if it opened the door to my house? And it does. How could the key to this person who lives in a hut open your house in the Bay Area that uses all these metal locks and all these things? That should be that's beyond coincidence. That's beyond like statistical hypotheses. How could such a thing actually happen, that the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom have this synergy that, based on our views of the divergence of animals and plants and how different we are, how could that possibly make sense? So that was fascinating to me. And as it turned out, the cancer research that I was doing the same thing. The tumor promoting agents were all natural compounds from croton plant from India, from blue-green algae, from Streptomyces mold. So fast forward to the 90s, by this point, cancer biology program at Stanford, Professor Winder went to Stanford the same time I did. So I was able to keep working with him. But what happened in that period, interim, was that here in the United States and maybe much of the world, there was somehow this sort of cognitive takeover, maybe propaganda, whatever you want to call it, that has led to this complete belief that effective drugs come from pharmaceutical companies and from biotech companies and not from nature. And that's just a lack of knowledge of history. That's like thinking the United States has its origin in pioneers and not the British Empire. It's like, you know, you need to read chapter 1. Don't start at chapter 5 in this history. And so, but as a result, a lot of scientists and physicians especially developed biases against natural product medicines. So by the late 80s, early 90s, when I started working in biotech, I was one of the few people that had the medical background and the science background, clinical research, clinical pharmacology, that wasn't anti-plant. And so I ended up working with a startup company. It was called Shaman Pharmaceuticals in the Bay Area. And so that sent me out to the rainforest, to the Amazon and the West and East Africa, working with traditional healers and shamans, which was very interesting and very broadening experience to go from being in a little operating room in Silicon Valley to being in the huge, Amazon forest.
Yeah.
So all of that really prepared me very well to deal with the complexity and the diversity within the cannabis plant, within the medical considerations of it, to understand botany a lot more than physicians typically do because they're not trained. And, shamans will tell you anytime, or traditional healers, when they're out collecting a plant in the forest, they don't just collect any plant. So say, for instance, you're looking for dandelions or something, or St. John's wort, which grows wild here. You might walk past a whole bunch of it and they're like, oh, you're like, hey, isn't this the plant we're looking for? Oh, yes. But it's growing beneath a tree. It's like, so it's like, growing beneath a tree doesn't work. And you walk along a little further, oh, here, here, here. It's like, oh no, it's growing beside the river. And it's like, and you're like, oh, you know, as a know-it-all, you know, Western trained person, it's like, this guy's just leading me around. It's like getting in a taxi someplace you don't know. They drive you around for hours, right? Yeah. And then way, way over there, it's like, yes, you know, here, growing in this, on the rocky plain and the upslope of this hill, you know, on the side where the sun rises. And you think, oh, okay, it's a bunch of religious mumbo jumbo. But also at that time, the technology isn't there available to confirm or deny. It's just a bias. But as we see with cannabis, depending on the growing conditions, you get a very different spectrum of phytochemicals. And so if there's a particular element or constituent, as they're called, within, say, cannabis, like cannabigerol, CBG, and maybe this treatment that he needs for this individual that he or she is treating will benefit from that CBG. And I used to have these arguments with the people at Shaman Pharmaceuticals. Well, how would he know? He doesn't have a mass spec to analyze it. It's like, well, because then the medicine doesn't work. You don't actually need to analyze. The ultimate analysis is always the patient outcome. And so that helped me to understand even things like grow. So is it the same to grow cannabis or even grapes in California compared to Oregon, Washington, France, Israel, you know, Chile? You're going to get different results. And this tendency that we have to generalize and say, oh, yeah, it's this strain or it's those genetics. There's a lot more to a plant than that. And so I've had this rich opportunity to kind of have like a Western version of a traditional healer or a shaman's training, more like Ayurveda than Mayo Clinic style, even though I, you know, did go to Harvard and Stanford. So when cannabis came online as being legal, and then the endocannabinoid system was discovered, it was like, hey, this is the Holy Grail. This is what I trained for.
You talk about the shamans has been, you know, I grew up overseas, you know, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years of my life, you know, and so I've seen different cultures. I've seen Eastern medicine, Western medicine, alternative, old historic, you know, like a shaman, you know, that's been around for thousands of years, passing on from generation to generation. Like, don't use this underneath the tree. Don't get on the side of the riverbank, but the one on the rocks is the one you want to look for. And I always laugh. It's like, who was the first person that said for asparagus or artichoke, don't eat the whole thing, peel it up. This is the heart. But if you don't take the stuff off before the heart, you're gonna have an itchy mouth. You know,
right? Well, like I was saying about the history book, a lot of times we start history with chapter 4. Yeah. And in chapter 1, 2, and 3, there could have been 100 people that had that problem and, you know, fell off the cliff over there. And Big Sur, you know, it's like, oh my God, you know, boom. And one guy that survived came back and said, yeah, this stuff's really good, but, you know, you've got to do this thing. Yeah. So there's a lot of those things. There's certain plants, I mean, even rutabagas, right? Yeah. That half the plant is poisonous. The leaves are poisonous and the stalk is fine, but I guess it's rutabaga. No, rhubarb. Excuse me, rhubarb. That's what it is. Rhubarb.
Well, I was thinking, you know what? I was still thinking pie though the whole time.
Yeah. It's the same thing. So that it's an interesting thing. It looks just like red chard. Yeah. Except bigger. Yeah. But red chard, you can eat the whole thing. Okay. So how many people thought they just had some really big red chard? And so, you know, if you look through history, so one of the things my mother, before she passed, taught me, because she was a teacher of what used to be called home economics. So cooking and nutrition and meal planning and all these things, sewing as well. You know, I used to, you know, sew with the sewing machine and all that stuff. She taught me when I was really young. And so one of those things is understanding, if you will, the complexity of what can appear to be very simple, you know, on the surface. And so, you know, it was very easy for me working with these shamans to understand the full recipe of what they were doing, because I'd worked with recipes for so long. Yeah. And because, you know, boiling is different than simmering, is different than baking, you know, the dried plant is different than the fresh plant, those sorts of things.
Well, you're talking about boiling, even the stinging nettles, you know? Don't touch that. But if you boil them, you can drink it as a tea, you know, and it helps with, different allergies, stuff like that. So again, nature's pharmacy, and there's so much out there. And it's and even the pharmaceutical companies, I mean, they've gone with the nature's pharmacy, but made them into synthetic and then making millions and billions of dollars. And it's sad because one of my favorite college professors was from the Amazon, and he wrote a book about what they're deforesting and taking down. I mean, it's just sad when you really see what's happening to our planet, and some of these nature's medicine, nature's pharmacy, they're extinct like some of the animals that are in there in the forest as well. And so bringing cannabis into that plant-based medicine, what are you seeing? Your and at the beginning, when I said your parents will be very proud, I'm certain your mother is very, very proud. I lost my dad. I can't imagine losing my father at age 11. I was 41, and I look back at friends of mine that lost their a parent when I was in grade school, and I just think, oh my gosh, I just, so I'm certain she's very, very proud of you. And so you did tell me at the beginning. And so, but plant-based medicines, you specialize, is cancer one of your main things you work with now because of your mom? And what are you seeing? If so, what are you seeing in the cancer industry with THC versus CBD and other cannabinoids?
Mostly when I work with people that have cancer, my big issue, I never was hoping to find a cure for cancer. And especially once you train in cancer, you realize it's a disease category, not a single disease.
Yeah.
But just a more humane treatment protocol so that people aren't so devastated. Because my mother went from being a very healthy woman that took me to church every Sunday, and we did judo classes together and got our green belts in judo together and all of that, to somebody who had to walk with a brace and a walker. All her hair had fallen out. She lost a lot of weight. She was no longer kind of like athletic or anything. And around about the same time, maybe like a year after she passed away, one of my favorite math teachers from elementary school also died of cancer. She died of lung cancer. She was a big smoker. And so I saw the process that occurs, and often people attribute the cachexia, the loss, the body wasting is the other term for it. In cancer patients, they often attribute that to the cancer, but it's not necessarily the case. A lot of times it's the toxic therapies, and many cancer treatments themselves are carcinogenic. The root origin, again, going back into the history of cancer chemotherapy, is with mustard gas, which was, a chemical weapon.
Yeah.
And I won't go into the anecdote about it, but there was a spill at a military base, and they saw that it knocked out the white blood cells of the military guys. So they decided, well, it might be good for treating lymphoma or leukemia. Wow. And so that's the beginning of this looking at toxic things to beat cancer. And I've given lectures about, immune support, immunomodulation, and cancer therapy. 10 years ago, I used to go all around the world doing these lectures and looking at natural approaches, not because they're natural, but because they're effective. But specifically being that presenting to people that really cancer is a symptom of a relative immune deficiency. Like HIV is a major immune deficiency. And so the body shuts down for people that have, if you will, full-blown AIDS. But cancer is, if you will, a marginal immune deficiency, in the sense that the immune system's job, one of its primary jobs, is to eliminate what are called transformed cells. And those cells can either be viral infected cells, like, in the case of COVID, or they can be mutated cells that have genetic mutations in the case of cancer. But from the perspective of the immune system, say natural killer cells and certain lymphocytes, that's all the same. Because what happens is when the cell becomes transformed, basically its face changes. And so, people that have adolescent kids or that have been rebellious adolescents themselves perhaps can recall the transformation you can see in a kid that, is, say, 14 years old and looks like a quote unquote normal kid, goes home for the summer, and by the time he or she comes back for, school in the fall, has piercings and tattoos and has this wild haircut and the hair is pink or something. You're like, wow, what happened to this kid? Well, that kid went through a transformational experience, whatever it was, whether it was music or drugs or a girlfriend or a boyfriend or hanging out with their uncle for the summer, whatever it was, you can tell that person's transformed because they don't look like they looked before. And so what the immune system does is it reacts like a lot of parents do. Cut your hair. you got to go back to being this clean-cut kid that you used to be. So the immune system is constantly on patrol for these cells that start to defect from the community guidelines for a functional human body. So what I do with cancer patients is help them to navigate the options that they have. Because quite often physicians, rather than telling you, well, this is the best thing I know how to do for you, they'll say, this is the best thing for you. And so you mentioned earlier pancreatic cancer. So I've helped some people through pancreatic cancer into remission through immune support, and also through choosing their primary surgeon or oncologist well, so that they weren't running into a lot of conflict about the dietary and lifestyle changes that they were making. And also with this one woman in particular, she had a surgeon down in Oregon who was going to cut off half of her pancreas, and then she would have to be on dialysis and all this. She's basically going to become a diabetic because of the surgery. And we decided, well, you can look for another surgeon and see if there's someone else, given your history and given your scans, that will do a less radical procedure. And this guy had his videos and his website, no, I'm the best, this is the only way to do it, and all that. Anyway, she ended up going to somebody at UW who did a small resection, and she's been in remission for about 3 or 4 years. Yeah. And so, it's unfortunate, it may seem, but I think it's just overly idealistic to think that physicians, surgeons are somehow different than other human beings, that they don't have egos, that they don't have biases, that they won't choose their favorite procedure over perhaps a safer procedure. It's just the nature of our species. There are these biases, and part of the challenge that we have, and what you were to me, what you were referring to when you were talking about the rainforest experience and the loss of species and those sorts of things, that's occurring on a global level because the culture that we have that is expanded globally into multiple nations of various races of people around the planet, the main kind of urban global culture is very sort of, if you will, xenophobic. It's very much anti-diversity. It's not just like a black-white issue or whatever. Depending on where you are in the world, people are still one religion or another. There's the British against the Irish, or the Japanese versus the Koreans. There's the Chileans versus the Peruvians, the Brazilians versus the Argentines. There's this lack of ability at a level that you could say of morality, consciousness, whatever term you might like to use, where humans are in denial that nature really is about diversity. And so it's on a bunch of different levels. So the foods that we eat have been narrowed down to a few species that the world depends on, that if there is some sort of a plague, like we have coronavirus, fungi or different infections can affect these food crops, and then suddenly there's nothing to replace them because we don't have a diversity of rice or corn or different types of greens and all of these things. So it's very easy to wipe out these industrial farms because you have a monoculture, and if something infects that monoculture, it's like a big city. Industrial agriculture is like a metropolitan city like New York or LA for the plants. Once this plague comes in, there's no place to hide because everything's packed in so tight. It's not like the diversity of a rainforest. So cannabis has chemical diversity. And with respect to cannabis, I'm, if you will, a champion of the indigenous members of the cannabis community, meaning that people tend to see THC and CBD as the primary active compounds within cannabis, and they often refer to the other cannabinoids as being minor cannabinoids, and sometimes even ignore the terpenes altogether. So that's what I mean by being anti-diversity. So a friend of mine that I worked with at Shaman Pharmaceuticals, her name is Dr. Marilyn Barrett, when she did her PhD on cannabis in the 80s, discovered flavonoids, which are a class of organic compounds that are often
Is
medicinal.
sorry to interrupt. Is this a cannabis company?
No. She did her PhD
Excuse me. Okay.
In London, and
Gotcha.
her
Okay.
PhD in pharmacognosy. But her group was the group that discovered what are called canflavins, which are flavonoid molecules that are unique to cannabis that have anywhere from 20 to 100 times the potency of anti-inflammatory drugs like aspirin. Okay, they're not cannabinoids and they're not terpenes, they're flavonoids, and nobody ever talks about this. I have this thing on silence and I don't know why it's ringing. No, I don't know why it's ringing. I thought I had it on silence. Anyway, the point being that ignoring the diversity of this plant that has upwards of 500 unique chemical constituents, molecular constituents that have bioactivity is a mistake. So looking at the indigenous population, so these canflavins are indigenous to cannabis. The terpenes are indigenous to cannabis. THC and CBD are not. Mm-hmm. THC and CBD are produced primarily by humans harvesting cannabis. And when cannabis is then exposed to heat and air or light, when it's decarboxylated, which is a common term used in the industry, especially in the recreational marijuana industry, the decarboxylation increases the THC content, which of course for recreational marijuana is the goal.
Yeah.
But for hemp, why are people processing hemp as though it's marijuana? So indigenous to the plant, there is no THC, there is no CBD, which means, of course, there's no reason for it to be a Schedule I drug. And the plant itself produces what's called cannabigerolic acid or CBG acid. And from that, you get CBD acid and THC acid, not acid like LSD, but just it has a little bit of CO2, carbon dioxide, on the molecule stuck there. And so the acidic forms are the indigenous compounds. And these other ones that we see are from heating and drying and curing the plant. It doesn't mean that they're not active, but they're definitely not the natural phytocannabinoids.
So CBD, let me hear if I heard you correctly. CBD and THC in your description are man-made due to heating and what we're doing to the plant, what man is doing to the plant.
Primarily. They can also occur if you just happen to let a bunch of cannabis plants die in the field or grow well past maturity. As they start to age, just like maple trees, change color. So as they start to age, let's say the biological integrity of the plant starts to decline. And so these molecules will degrade spontaneously into CBD and THC, but it's not a process born of the plant. It comes from the decline of the plant, either because it's aging or it's been cut down.
So would CBN fall into that, of the decline of the plant of THC converting into CBN?
Yeah, so you can arrive at CBN through a number of different pathways. But yeah, so CBN typically comes from THC. And as THC is aged, if you will, or degraded, then it produces CBN, which has less of an intoxicating high effect and more of a sedating effect.
Yeah, this plant is so amazing because when you really get down to it, there's so many different benefits of each and every one of these cannabinoids. And I've talked about this on my show. And whenever I do a presentation, I'll have a slideshow, but I'll have a roll of duct tape up there, and people look at me like, "Hey, dummy, you left the wrong slide up there." And I said, "No, actually, I have so many people. Does it work for this? Does it work for that? Does it work for this?" And I said, I don't want to say it's like duct tape with 1,000,001 uses, but when you really get down, it has so many benefits. Just like you said, nature's pharmacy down even in the rainforest, they all have, oh, take this will cure your hiccup.
Right.
Take this will stop you from having, gas.
Right.
And the same thing with the benefits of this plant. And so let's talk about the benefits of the plant, especially with cancer. So are you still in cancer, CBD, THC is what everyone. What do you say? Because I get this all the time. I want the medical portion of the plant, not the recreational portion of the plant. And I always say, all portions of the plant are beneficial, especially
right.
And you don't have to have more is not always better, and anything more water is not better. More, whatever you're into is not better. More exercise is not better. And I think we're all different. And you spoke about wine earlier. My brother's been in the wine business for 20 something years.
Oh.
You can have a sip of wine, or you can drink 3 bottles of wine.
Right.
See the difference there. And the same thing with THC. The benefits of THC, even with the entourage effect, work with each other. You don't have to have, 1,000 milligrams. You can have success at 2 to 5 milligrams. We're all built differently. Even if, we're both 6'1", 200 something pounds, same ailment. What might work for me may not be
right.
Your
ideal treatment.
Exactly. And so, can you touch up on that? And then going after the cancer cells, do you believe that THC kills cancer cells while CBD stops the spread? Is that your mindset, or have you even taken it further?
Okay, so a little quick thing. So as I was saying, the indigenous compounds that are indigenous to the cannabis plant.
The look on your face, I'm ready for this one, so bring it on.
Okay, reductionism, which is a core principle of this modern culture that we're all kind of a part of and affected by, is the enemy of diversity. It's the interest to further and further so-called refine. Even the word itself is saying that it's becoming improved, it's becoming refined. As you take sugar cane and make it into white sugar, that it's been refined because you got rid of these other things, as though there was anything in the plant itself that was somehow not useful. Kids in the Caribbean and in tropical areas chew on sugarcane. People drink sugarcane juice and they don't get diabetes and they don't get cavities. But people that eat refined sugar have a very different experience. Yeah. Cocaine is refined coca. Morphine and heroin are refined opium. So THC is a molecule. You can call it refined cannabis, but it's following that cultural trend that tends to lead to intoxication. So in this particular space, you mentioned grapes and wine. Yep. So if you start with grapes, which is the actual plant, that's like cannabis itself. And what's inside of grapes is a lot of sugar, a lot of fruit sugar, natural fruit sugar, that when fermented, after the grapes are squeezed, then produce alcohol. And you don't actually even have to add any yeast to it, because there's natural yeast that grow on grape plants. As they get very, very ripe, they're attracted to the sugars and the moisture and that whole sort of thing, which perhaps is the origin of wine, how anybody ever started fermenting wine in the first place, because you can actually find berries that are already fermented, not just grapes, but other berries, because of the action of these molds. But the point being, as you start with grapes and then you go to grape juice and then you have wine, and then from wine, depending on what direction you go, and if you leave the wine open to air, it becomes wine vinegar. If you take that wine and you run it through an extraction process like is used with cannabis, you can make a concentrate, and that's called brandy. And if you take that brandy another step, then and age it and all those sorts of things, and you have cognac. But if you decide to take that extraction even further to have an isolate, you end up with Everclear. You end up with purified ethanol. Now, I would think anybody that drinks can detect a difference between grape juice and Everclear. I think that anybody that drinks can detect a difference between wine and Everclear. Okay. And so, but because of the cultural belief, this part of the opportunity of having multicultural exposure, like you were mentioning, in the way you grew up and also in the way that I've grown up and experiences that I've had as an adult, then allows me to stand back and say, well, what is this culture doing with cannabis, with the science, and even with cancer, and to recognize certain patterns. And so if Everclear isn't the go-to drink for the whole world, why should an isolate be the go-to remedy derived from cannabis for cancer? Yes. So part of this reductionism is this sense So obviously there are other molecules in grape juice and in wine, like resveratrol and the anthocyanins and all that. There are lots of cyanins. There are lots of beneficial molecules. And the challenge is, so I look, first of all, at cannabis like food. So are you going to try and tell me, like people often try to tell you, this is why you should eat kale. It has oxalic acid. It has this. It has this. It's like, that's really not what's important. And as you start to isolate that, you're starting to ignore these other things. It's like meeting a woman and saying, hey, you know what's great about her? She's got pretty hair, or she's got great legs, or other parts that I won't mention on your show. And so this objectification, and of course, cannabis is a bunch of female plants. Hey, look at how big the flowers are on my plant. Whoa, and so part of that attitude is a cultural approach. Because in the rainforest, you don't find a bunch of teenagers grabbing their uncle's ayahuasca and grabbing chicks and going out in a canoe and trying to get stoned. I'm just going to turn this thing off. I don't know why it won't stop. I turned off the ringer and everything. Steve Jobs is reaching from beyond the grave and controlling my phone. Anyway, another pancreatic cancer patient. So anyway, so I mentioned all of that so also that people can accept that I have a broader view of cannabis and also of cancer. So the idea of killing cancer cells for me is not the issue, because cancer cells to me are not really the enemy any more than, like I said, the teenager who's gone punk is an enemy in his or her own household. Cancer cells are human cells. They come from our own bodies. Yep. And cancer is not something that just happens to cancer patients. Theoretically, you could say that every human, especially every adult, has cancer, but it's subclinical, because theoretically all cancers begin with a single cell that transforms. Just like every bad neighborhood starts with a single, they say, a crack house. And that one crack house then starts to transform the whole neighborhood and the culture. And so suddenly you have this toxic environment that intoxicates the neighboring cells, the neighboring households. It's even been shown that cancer cells can actually consume the cells that are next to them. Okay, so they're like these carnivorous or cannibalistic cells. But the reason I'm not such a proponent of killing cancer is because it's very difficult to tell the difference between a cancer cell and a human cell, because they're both human. Like I said, it's just the difference between that, say, you're like a PE teacher or something in high school, that 14-year-old kid you had back in June and the 15-year-old kid who's come back in September who looks completely different. He or she still might love to play volleyball, but maybe based on our judgment, it's like, we need to get rid of this. We need to give him a haircut and get rid of that pink dye. So I'm not saying to not eliminate the cancer cells, but to recognize and honor the fact that we created them, our lifestyle, all those things. The things that we eat are much more complex than individual molecules. Perhaps we need more cannabinoids in our diet. But the fundamental issue with cancer is a failure of the immune system to perform its surveillance to continually eliminate on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute basis these transformed cells as they arise in the body. Because there are trillions of cells in the body, like thousands of times more cells in your body or my body than there are humans on the planet. Yeah. So it's a community that needs to be able to live and work together. Trillions, billions on our planet, we're at war. Okay, so imagine trying to keep trillions of cells from the brain and the pancreas and the liver and the toenails and everything all in harmony with one another, not taking more oxygen and taking away all the sugar. That's what the cancer does. That's why the rest of the body starves, because it wants more than its fair share. Again, like the teenager raiding the refrigerator, right? And dad can't have a roast beef sandwich later because, Junior, what happened?
Yeah.
But so that's really all that's going on. And it's about retraining the body's immune system to then pick up on these cancers. So the difference is that cancer is a medical diagnosis. And so until the diagnostic abilities of medicine are at the same level where the cancer is, it can't be detected. Like a breast cancer, until the lump is big enough to palpate, the woman doing the breast exam can't find it, or a mammogram can't find it below a certain size. Well, when it can't be detected, it's still not called cancer. It's just called carcinogenesis, but it has no clinical definition because the doctor can't find it, but it's still going on. Breast cancer takes 15 to 20 years, okay, to become a detectable breast cancer. So what I say is, in those 15 to 20 years, why not try some hemp oil or some juice? Hemp oil or hemp product, even fresh juice, all along the way. And these immunomodulators that will help the immune system eliminate future cancers. If this 35-year-old woman has an older sister or an aunt or a mother who had breast cancer, they should know that they're already in line for that. Just like with Alzheimer's and people whose parents have Alzheimer's, there are things that people can do to adjust in their lifestyle and also in their intake of various, supplements, cannabis being one of them, that can help to mitigate those issues so that they don't even have to cure the cancer. When it comes to killing cancer cells, usually that's done in vitro, in a cell dish. That doesn't tell you how toxic it's going to be to the human that takes it. So that's where the error in that whole process or mindset is. Can you go into that neighborhood, kill all the crack dealers without shooting any innocent people? The collateral damage is the toxicity of the chemotherapy.
Well, with the toxicity, the chemotherapy, and I'm a fan of conventional medicine as well, but doesn't chemotherapy come in and kill all cells, good and bad, where plant-based medicines, I do a lot of the integrative oncology world, and there's a lot of times, being a health advocate, again, I'm not a doctor, but redirecting, I do research a lot, especially now, after my wife has passed, and I did a lot in the midst of it, seeing higher success rates on different ailments. And the one that really stood out, and Crit and I did not do chemoradiation. And one study that we came across from these integrative oncologists was that there was a 2.1 success rate in Australia with chemoradiation and 2.3 or 2.4 success rate here in the States. Why they use Australia as a marker, I don't know. Probably because they're so strict on you're even seeing it with COVID. I think that Australia, even with HIV, they shut that country down. You're not coming in and you're not coming out. Right. Same thing with COVID. So maybe that's why they use that as a marker. We didn't go that route. We believed in we didn't have a plan B. We really thought we were going to beat this bloody thing. And so do you feel people, because like you said, we all have cancer in us, depending on what state, where it is in our body before it even gets to a stage. Do you think humans should take a type of cannabinoid on a daily basis as plant-based medicine, as a nutrient in our bodies?
I think of it as a nutrient. I think of it as feeding the endocannabinoid system, like Dr. Ethan Russo talks about. It makes sense to me. Remember that roughly 100 years ago, nobody had heard of vitamins. And so they were later found. The reason they're called vitamins is because they're considered to be vital amines. The amines are the type of molecular structure that they have. And so there are these vital components in the foods that people are eating that if they don't eat the right combination of foods, they start to have these diseases. And the structure of our medicine, we have a tendency to recognize pain and suffering. And so when somebody has scurvy or beriberi or pellagra, these other vitamin deficiencies, their hair falls out, they have bleeding gums or whatever, then suddenly people recognize this, and then they recognize that, oh, well, if they have this citrus juice, or if they eat, regular grass, like from the lawn grass, not like marijuana grass, but it probably would work with that too, then somehow the scurvy goes away. So it's hard, I think, for people, especially with smartphones and supercomputers and AI, to acknowledge that we still don't necessarily know how to feed ourselves well. We're still kind of like toddlers that are going to just stick anything in our mouth, and it may not be good for us, or it may be. And so that level of accuracy of saying, oh, you should take this because it has this molecule, the science really isn't at that level yet, even though people act as though it is. But the benefits that can be derived, this endocannabinoid system functions, as they call it, as a harm reduction system to maintain homeostasis. And a lot of people have different interpretations of that. But part of the function of that is to modulate the nervous system, reproductive system, appetite, immune system, lots of different digestive system in the body in order to have a, if you will, healthful balance or homeostasis within the body. The process of killing of cancer cells occurs not because there's some general toxicity that goes flowing through the body. So THC and CBD, or THCA and CBDA as well, are not flowing through the body having toxic effects on cells that the cancer cells just happen to be more sensitive to because they're more aggressive and growing faster. That's the way that chemotherapies work. They work as toxins. And if you hope, just like in a very medieval, like with the witches and witch hunts, that the poison will kill the bad before it kills the good. So the whole approach to chemotherapy is really very medieval, to give people poisons that would make a healthy person sick. But because this person is already sick, we've already given them up for dead because they have cancer, then we can poison them, and hopefully the poison will kill the poison inside of them. So it's really like these, like an exorcism. It's really, to me, a very primitive approach to a systemic disease. But the cannabinoids, the phytocannabinoids, the indigenous ones, the CBD and the THC as well, function to redirect the energies, if you will, or the actions of the immune system, such that you recognize, for instance, a popular effect that people talk about, apoptosis, which is that the cancer cells self-destruct, that they receive instructions from the greater body that their time has come and it's time for them to end. That's a common set of instructions that occurs in the human body. And, and that's how, we end up with fingers, 5 fingers, instead of webbing in between, that in the embryonic state, these cells that used to connect all of these things were told, okay, your time is done, time to disappear. So is it really death? Are they really being killed? That's kind of like this barbaric approach, as opposed to saying that this community is modifying itself. And just because we're so focused on this tumor mass, it really is to create an environment in which carcinogenesis is not favored. And the attitude of the human being has shifted away from death back towards life. Because just one additional small thing, I think it's a small thing. What is it that makes cancer such a big problem? It's the same thing that occurs really with COVID, and that people also don't pay attention to. And there are lots of studies coming out now, the utility of THC and CBD and other cannabinoids in preventing COVID, preventing the infection, and also stopping the spread. But what makes infectious diseases and cancer such a big problem is they don't just hit one person, right? So if a person has arthritis, okay, if a person has a migraine, they'll be the only person with that. They can walk and hang out with people, swim in the pool, sleep with whoever they want, and nobody's ever going to get their migraine or their arthritis. An infectious disease is communicable, so one person who has it can give it to several other people. Cancer is a systemic disease, so you won't transfer it from person to person in general, but it can transfer from the breast to the bone, to the brain, to the heart, to the liver, to these different, it keeps seeding itself through a process called metastasis. These are little individual cells that are kind of like seeds, like that bad neighbor who doesn't, cut his or her grass, and the dandelions grow, and the little white puffy things go flying around, and then they land on other people's lawns. And then what do people usually do? They spray Roundup, which is toxic and cancer causing, to kill those dandelions. But if you stop this spread of these seeds, if you have a way to catch them, vacuum them up, clip the tops off of those dandelions before they go to seed, or even better yet, use them for salad, then you don't have this.
With your rhubarb pie, right?
There it is. Then you don't have this spreading issue. So cancer surgery, for instance, there are studies that show that cancer surgery spreads cancer, because as they're grabbing these weeds out of the garden, little pieces break off, little seeds break off. And as you're dragging this big bag full of cancer seeds out of the body from, say, the abdomen, the little fluffy seeds start to go in through the bloodstream and end up in other parts of the body. So, for instance, at that stage, as I used to try and teach the surgeons, there should be immune modulating therapy, because surgery and anesthesia depress the immune system. So depress the body's ability to fight off the spread of this cancer. That's the time when you would want to take an immune modulator, whether it was a mushroom-based compound, whether it was based from cannabis. It could be, hemp oil. The ratio between THC and CBD, a lot of that would have to do not only with the type of cancer, but also the pain and pain tolerance of the individual, and also the level of cognitive function. To me, it's a very individual thing. Cancer is personal for me. It's not population. But so that aspect of it, of the utility of cannabinoids, there is ample scientific research. There is ample justification from a mechanistic standpoint of why it should work, and why it works in many people. It's not necessarily a reason to abandon surgery and chemotherapy altogether, but the smartest approach would be to look at all of these benefits at once and not always wait until someone is end stage.
Totally. So that was my next thing, because we hear a lot of people say, let me try this, and if this doesn't work, then I'll try cannabis, or I'll try some other plant-based or non-FDA approved procedures.
Right.
Are you so it sounds like you're a fan of combining. I mean, if they want to do the conventional, that you are a fan of combining cannabinoid therapeutics to something is
I believe in using whatever works.
Yeah.
I don't believe in integrative medicine or alternative medicine, because I don't believe that anything that works is an alternative.
Yeah.
It's the main, it's primary. And so to me, to call an alternative medicine that works is like calling women in the workforce alternative employees. No, they're employees, and they're contributing, and maybe sometimes their numbers are higher. They may be more effective than the guys. And so that's what I mean about this reductionist, isolationist approach that tends to marginalize the useful components. So the approaches that you're mentioning, so lifestyle changes, and including dietary changes, and looking at multiple markers, and not waiting until the end, because the real end, who is it that gets the very last opportunity to help the patient? It's the priest, right?
Or
patients never die from surgery, or seldom die from surgery or from medicine. It's that priest. If they could just keep the priest out of the room. I just always thought when I was there at Stanford, I said, why can't the priest come in 2 weeks ago? I mean, it's definitely, what are the side effects of prayer? And so why is there such a hard wall? If this person has a relationship with the church, why not let the priest come in and do a few prayers? And there's no studies that show that it works. It's like, well, do you want to wait until there's a study 5 years from now and then say, oh gosh, maybe I should have been doing that for my patients all along? First do no harm is Hippocrates. It didn't say first prove it with the FDA. It said first do no harm.
So talk about prayer. I'll tell you 2 stories about prayer. So this integrative oncology organization that Crit and I have been involved with for the past 8 years plus, but the very first conference we went to, they did a roundtable discussion, and they had doctors up on stage, and the audience started asking questions. They said, what are the things you do look at? They said, first off, we look at, one, we asked them religious background. Are they open to, do you have a God that you pray to? We ask them what their home life is like. Are they married?
Right.
Do they get along with their spouse? Do they get along with their kids? Then they ask, do they have the will to live? And then the doctor said, we'll even pray with the patient. Just the comment. And I said, I'll be damned. Finally, a doctor's thinking outside the box. And I love that approach. And I just fell in love with that group and that community because of that. When Corinne was in the hospital, her birthday was October 15th, and she passed a few days afterwards. But I asked her priest to come in, and he came in and started. He blessed her for her birthday. And I remember the look of my wife. I mean, I knew every from my wife. I mean, we were just that connected on every level. And he came in. My mom was there, and my mom goes to church 6 days a week. If it wasn't for my dad, she would have been a nun. I know that for a fact. And so, but this priest comes in and he starts reading it, and Corinne, who had been sitting there, her eye opened up and she looks at me like, I'm not going anywhere. And I went, Father, I didn't ask you to read. I asked you to bless her for her birthday. And I said, no disrespect, Father. This woman is pure and she's not a sinner. For if she wanted to cleanse her of sins. And he looks at me. Ask my mom. She goes to church 6 days a week. And he looks at me, and he looked at me like, good. And the Corinne was like, no, I don't need any last rites. But it was, we were connected to the very, 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 very end. But, I am a fan of that. My dad been in the hospital. Our priest came, and we had a family from the bed over said, Father, we're not religious, but would you come over and pray with my father? And, when you're in those things, in the situations, if it says eat this mouse, you'll eat the mouse. If it says pray,
right.
Why take hope? Why take?
Yeah.
I never
exactly. And so the thing is the narrowing of considerations down to a narrower set of possibilities eliminates certain possibilities and actually increases the incidence of side effects. But the point being, though, that's why I said that everything that could be useful and is not harmful, to me, should be on the table. The outside of the box, I've never really related to boxes at all, except, occasionally from Amazon. Yeah. I think it's silly for somebody who's making global decisions for another human being to approach them with a box, because my box is not your box. Really? But the point is, there have been studies that showed, for instance, Dr. Spiegel down at Stanford in the psychiatry department, one of my roommates had worked on this trial with him back in the 80s, I guess it was, showed increased survival, originally at least, among women breast cancer patients when they had a group that they met with like once a week, and also some of them underwent hypnosis and that sort of thing. So, but for me, proof is not really that sort of proof. Statistically significant proof doesn't concern me so much. I start with a very basic definition of healing, which is about making people feel better. And I used to teach people to be healers. And the first lesson was I would go up back in the days of the chalkboard, and I would draw a circle on the chalkboard and make a smiley face. And then everybody would kind of laugh. I said, so this is step number one. If you can get somebody to smile, you have already healed them. You've made them feel better. It's not always about making their cancer go away. It's not always about getting rid of their high blood pressure, their high blood sugar. Is this human being leaving my presence feeling better than they did before? And in this culture, there's a lot of animosity towards how a person feels. It's this very utilitarian approach. If somebody can feel better because of THC or psilocybin or microdosing, it's like, well, but that's not real. It's like, well, actually it's very real. The rest of it is secondary. So there are a lot of these cultural issues, but given those different aspects and what the actual goals are for people, which is to live well, to live better, those sorts of things, I look at what helps to promote health in people. So you mentioned looking at the home life and the family life and the religion. Yeah, it's shown. There are multiple studies. Like I told you, I used to do this immunomodulation in cancer. One of the studies that I used to present to people was that showed that as people become depressed, their immune function becomes depressed. That when people travel and are jet lagged, which I often was because I was giving talks in Thailand and Japan and then Croatia and places like that. So I would say to them, I said, so, I anticipate that because I've traveled so far out of my time zone, and this is a biological anomaly. Humans weren't designed to be able to go halfway around the planet in that short period of time. Yeah. This is really time travel. To be able to move from one time zone to another, jet lag is a symptom of time travel. It's just slow. The planes aren't going, Mach 5 and they're not going warp 5, But if they're going 500 miles an hour, that's still faster than a horse in a buggy or walking. And so it's a new experience for us in this modern age. So if the studies show me that my immune system is depressed, and I rode over here on an airplane and there are people coughing on the airplane, even pre-COVID, then why wouldn't I boost my immunity, in fact, in advance of taking those trips? And it turned out the company I was working for back then, Daiwa Pharmaceuticals, a natural pharmaceuticals company from Japan, had this product called BRM4 that had lots of studies in the cancer space, but as general immune modulation, which also, as I said, includes resistance from viral infections. So I said, I focus on boosting my immunity before I expose myself to this new community of pathogens on the airplane, in the airport, in a foreign country, all of those things. So to me, these are just little common sense things that people could do with respect to depression. So depression is linked to inflammation, to immune dysfunction. And when there is inflammation in the gut, like when there's a poor microbiome, people aren't eating well, people that have IBD and IBS, there are signals that go from the from the gut to the brain. Isn't that funny? From the gut to the brain to tell the person to be depressed. Now, it just seems like, wow, that's weird. People try and figure it out. And some people say, well, depression makes people sleep more and stay at home, so they're less likely to spread a disease and they're more likely to heal. And those things may be true. But the point is, depression doesn't just come because somebody in the family dies or somebody loses their job. It can come from purely, if you will, a physiologic basis. This inflammation that runs out of control in the body is also pro-carcinogenic. So yes, managing the moods of people and the relationships of people, like I said, at that quantum carcinogenesis level, at the level of the individual carcinogen and the individual transformed cell, before it becomes this big monster, that is overwhelming to the body. It's like, look, there are these things going on. It really is unhealthy to work at a job that you hate and go home filled with that anger and do things that are available for a person to do, whether it's drinking too much, abusing the spouse or the kids, or being angry, watching porn, whatever it is that a person is engaging in that state of mind. The problem isn't the porn. The problem isn't even yelling. It's the emotional attitude behind that and the signal that then goes from the brain back out to the rest of the body. So this endocannabinoid system is definitively the mind-body connection at the systemic, physiologic, and molecular level. As far down as we can look, that's where those connections are, okay? And so a change in mood changes the amount of serotonin, changes addictive behavior, changes the amount of screen time on a cell phone. It changes relationships. People may, if they put down their phones, that may change the relationship between mom and dad or whatever, So all of these things that people like to try and pretend they're not really significant, is not as important as likes or blood sugar and blood pressure. No, those are markers. But the core of human life and well-being is the reason for being alive and the things that a person can do. So my work, my focus, I don't focus on cancer. I don't really even just focus on cannabis. I focus on how can people live better, regardless of their politics, regardless of their gender preference or racial preference. I really don't care. I don't wish cancer on anybody. I think that people make better decisions, life decisions and community decisions when they're in good health, not when they're angry and unemployed and PTSD and feeling disenfranchised. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. You're likely to go and screw up somebody else's life when you're in that situation. And it's very easy to drink a bunch of things that motivate people to go out en masse and to do those things. And so it's really about extending that embrace of nature and the well-being of life to as many humans as possible, so that, this thing can kind of become more of a community, like a healthy human body, than these warring factions that run around. And interestingly, one little thing, and we're probably going to have to tie up pretty soon, because I'll go off and talk about the whole universe if you let me. The plant kingdom and the human kingdom have this other connection, which is to me super interesting. In the human body, there are also what are called endocannabinoids. And that's part of what fascinates me about this space, that it's not just a plant that affects the body, but the body has a system that the plant is feeding and stimulating, that the system within the body may be depleted or suboptimal in order to deal with different circumstances, whether it's cancer, depression, insomnia, arthritis, getting hit in the head in a contact sport or a pugilist sport, all those things, how to modulate that body so this human can get through life and experience life in the way that they want to. These endocannabinoids primarily arise from an endogenous compound within the body called arachidonic acid. And so anandamide and 2-AG and all of that, at the core of their molecular structure is this compound called arachidonic acid, okay? And it is associated with stress. And so depending on in the body, whether if a person is kind of stressed, the adrenal glands and other systems in the body can push that person's physiology in the direction of inflammation and chronic inflammation, which leads to lots of problems, like I mentioned, cardiovascular disease, cerebral vascular disease, depression, cancer, lots of problems, or in the direction of the production of more endocannabinoids that then change this person from within to perhaps being more relaxed, less stressed, getting over their PTSD, insomnia, having better relationships, that sort of a thing. So I look at the ability of the system to steer people more towards their optimum, away from addiction to drugs like cocaine and benzodiazepines and opioids. So a lot of this, like I said, homeostasis, bringing this person into balance, not a balance that's dictated by a guru or the FDA or, but what is optimal for you or for me in our own individual life to live, our choices. And so the plant kingdom has this same system with arachidonic acid. And much of what you find in these plants, like cannabis and other plants like white willow bark that produces the precursor to aspirin, that aspirin inhibits this activity of arachidonic acid that causes inflammation. They're all working in the same space because remember, plants get stressed too. Wildfires are a big stress for plants, okay? Insect infestations and fungus and too much rain or not enough rain. And the way those plants respond to that stress produces compounds that help them cope with the stress. And often those compounds, like the cannabinoids in cannabis, hemp, and marijuana, help the human being that takes in those stress response, stress mitigating compounds, help the humans to mitigate their own stress. To me, that's like the coolest thing in the whole world.
It's amazing, this plant. I was going to ask you, and I want to be courteous of your time as well. Did you learn about the endocannabinoid system in medical school at Stanford, at Harvard?
It didn't exist.
It didn't
exist yet. Endocannabinoid system is just a little bit over, 20, like a little bit over 20 years old.
Yeah.
But it takes about 10 years before the findings in laboratories make it into textbooks, that sort of a thing. So I heard about the findings, but the endocannabinoid system really, it's still not really known. Not only is it not being taught in medical schools, but the expanse of it still really isn't known, just like the expanse of, what is the internet? Because the endocannabinoid system is basically like the operating system within the smart device that is the human body. And, what is really going on in your smart device? What is really going on in the internet? It would take decades to explore it just to find out what's going on today. And by that time, it would have changed. And so the endocannabinoid system was discovered because of the pursuit of THC. What's the active site for THC in the body? But again, that pursuit is because of the association of cannabis as marijuana, as the hashish that Dr. Meshulam was researching, as a drug of abuse intended for intoxication, never for the treatment of arthritis or cancer, PTSD, depression, that sort of thing, or anxiety, unfortunately. So all of the science of cannabis is skewed in the direction of THC and intoxication, just like the production of hemp and cannabis products are skewed in the direction of maximizing THC, as though that's the greatest thing that can be done with the plant. And it's not. Just like, I mean, do you grow coffee to maximize the caffeine? No. Okay. And so this sort of an approach, this sort of skewing, cannabis in this yang direction and away from the yin direction, again, it's ignoring that other half, that female half, feminine half. It's, again, the box, the limiting the diversity, the reductionism, the whole plant altogether with its endogenous compounds or indigenous compounds, either way you could say it. That is where the source and the key is, and to continue research in that direction. The two main cannabinoid receptors, CB1 and CB2, are associated with THC. Why? Because it was discovered first? No, because it gets people high. Because you can get in a canoe with chicks and give them THC and do things they wouldn't otherwise do. That's what humans want. They like to control other people. Okay? CBD doesn't really control anybody, so it got put on the shelf. Okay? So we need to look into not just intoxicating one another, but being able to share a healthy space with one another. And that begins with these endogenous compounds and looking at CBD and THC and the global benefits, in addition to the anti-cancer and anti-anxiety benefits, but not just looking at disease, but also looking at health.
Health and well, and unfortunately, that's the one thing that frustrates me is that many of these states, they all have their different qualified conditions, and health and wellness is not on there. Health and wellness is not on there. And that's
bizarre. And yet they talk about a healthy economy, and how do you have healthy economy without having healthy people? We have this long history of slavery across all the cultural groups, whether it's people in chains or people in coal mines, and their well-being has never been considered, and it's the willingness to send somebody off to, some foreign country, Afghanistan, Vietnam, and have their head blown off and not really care about that person's well-being, just their ability to kill another person. So I'm not particularly pro-war, because it's like, there's a lot of things we could do together that, before we go off doing these other things. Are these kids getting good schooling? Are they physically fit? Are they being bullied in school? A friend of mine who's also in the cannabis industry, lives in Colorado, lives in a suburb and all that kind of stuff. We both grew up in Detroit, but now he lives in Colorado. He was telling me that between his 3 kids that are still like high school age, all of them are high school age, they already know 14 kids that have committed suicide.
Wow.
And not just in the technical sense of tried suicide, but died. Okay, so effectively committed suicide. And where is that on the map?
Yeah.
Suicide is going up while COVID is going up and going around. But there are these kids, and these are suburban kids. These aren't ghetto kids or immigrant kids. These are kids that the country should really be caring about. I think they should care about everybody. But if the people that are hating other people aren't caring about their own kids, we're in a lot of trouble. So that means that, to me, it's like, look, let me become a billionaire, win the lottery tomorrow, and, rent one of Elon Musk's SpaceX jets. I'm going to take some vape juice and just fly over the whole country at low altitude. It's just, people really need to kind of chill out and reconnect with their endocannabinoid systems, because, we're not as much enemies as we are alike, and we harm ourselves and we ruin the whole planet with this whole sort of antagonistic kind of violent conquest approach. Leave the rainforest alone, get the plastic bottles out of the ocean, shake hands with your neighbor, have a neighborhood dance or something.
Yeah. Now I have a friend that he's almost like Johnny Appleseed, and he throws cannabis seeds all around. He goes, some may take, some may not. Man, I have so many other questions I want to talk to you about, but I know it's time. One,
we can always do another show if you like.
I would love to do another show with you. One, you being anesthesiologist, this comes up all the time. I was told by my anesthesiologist, John, that I need to stop cannabis up 10 to 2 weeks in advance, and especially if they're battling something as severe as cancer, and cannabis has been part of their medical regime. What are your thoughts on that? Take on that?
So being an anesthesiologist, anesthesiologists tend to be deathly afraid of unknown factors. And so because cannabis and anesthesia haven't been researched, and the anesthesiologist is responsible for keeping the patient alive while the surgeon is basically cutting them open and the body thinks it's dying. So it's understandable that there's this apprehension. But are they going to tell that same person to stop taking their antidepressants? Are they going to tell that same person to, for 2 weeks, stop having 3 beers a night? And exactly. So all those things. So cannabis is not more difficult across the board. When you have people that drink a lot, drink more than, say, 3 or 4 drinks a day, their anesthetic requirement tends to go up. But the basic skills required to manage a patient in anesthesia don't really change. The dosages may change, but the parameters that you have to watch don't change so much. If it's very, very sensitive surgery, like neurosurgery for a brain tumor or something, there may be some critical balances that people are very concerned about. But again, they're dealing with an unknown.
Okay.
So say if a diabetic comes in, we try to normalize out their blood sugar before they even go to the OR, because there are lots of problems that diabetics can have and their mortality rate goes up. But those are known things. So anesthesia basically usually uses multiple drugs to achieve what's called a balanced anesthetic effect, so that people don't have pain. They also don't have recall. They don't move around in the bed, all those things. Well, cannabis is basically like a balanced anesthetic all in one plant, because it's anti-anxiety and it's anti-stress. It has analgesic components. It actually supports the immune system. I wouldn't suggest anybody have their gallbladder taken out just on, dabs or something, but to recognize that it's a valid medicine that merits research to understand how can it interface with mainstream medicine most effectively, and to get rid of some of the barriers and the boxes to this knowledge, because there's a lot of us as scientists that are very interested in doing the research and seeing it all become unified to a greater understanding of human health and wellness, and even recovery from illness and injury.
Where do you see, I'm going to throw one more in here at you. Where do you see cannabis going as a medicine in mainstream?
That's tricky. It depends on what people do. I have a tendency to be overly optimistic, and I can see it becoming very mainstream, like, dark chocolate and kale and a lot of these other health things that people that are interested in their own health will continue to consume. And eventually, over time, just like vitamins, you got vitamin D milk and vitamin enriched drinks and all these sorts of things. And so I think there's a tendency of the consumer demand to kind of go along and often follow celebrities and that sort of thing. But cannabis is a great benefit. I think cannabis has the potential to remedy a lot of the ill that exists between humans and within humans in the world. Like I said, flying over with vape juice, it's like chemtrails, but with CBD. Anyway,
I think you're onto something.
Yeah. I mean, it's and I know there's a lot of history there, so there's a lot of controversy, and I'm not saying it 100% in seriousness, but really that people have free access to nourishing the endocannabinoid system, because, as I mentioned, Dr. Russo has identified several conditions that I won't go into here, several conditions that he associates with a relative endocannabinoid deficiency. And these acidic cannabinoids like THC and CBD not only help increase the bioavailability, CBDA and THCA, not only help to increase the bioavailability of CBD and THC, but also enhance their bioactivity. So, for instance, with THCA and CBDA, that CBDA has been shown to be 1,000 times more potent as a binding to serotonin receptors, which is associated with relief from the nausea and vomiting that chemotherapy patients have, and also relief from anxiety. And as a final little thing, since you're throwing things out, remember I mentioned arachidonic acid?
Yep.
And the endocannabinoids. Tylenol, acetaminophen, is a cannabinoid. Okay, that little cherry syrup that people give to their kids binds to the same receptor that THC does. When the molecule of Tylenol is brought into the body, and say the molecule looks like this, okay, it goes through the liver, and the liver breaks it in half, and all you have left is this, and then it sticks arachidonic acid onto it, and when you look at it, it looks just like anandamide and 2-AG, the endocannabinoids, the general molecular structure, that lock and key. It has the same key part that those endogenous molecules have, and it's been shown that the analgesic effects, the pain relief effects of Tylenol, of acetaminophen, are related to its interaction with the endocannabinoid system. And it goes further. If you look, it's been like 3, 4, 5 years now, maybe longer, but several studies showed that Tylenol, acetaminophen, not only has this pain relief effect, it's actually used in anesthesia. Okay, it's an anesthetic drug, but it also can affect the levels of empathy in a person. It can therefore affect performance anxiety. You can think of the negative effects of empathy, like, it's the you're on there at the foul line, and there's 5 seconds left on the clock, and you're down by 1 point, and if you can hit these two, you win the NBA championship or whatever, and you're in the opposing team's arena, and they're going, boo, yeah, and they're waving all that stuff right in front of your line of sight as you're shooting these foul shots. Empathy will make you take sides with your opponent's fans, right? Because they're humans. Just because, they're from Denver and not from LA or whatever, they're still human beings, and that affects people, right? So Tylenol perhaps could help people improve their athletic performance by not being swayed by the crowd. It also helps to blunt what's called social anxiety and the pain of rejection. So it can help people with interviews, anxiety of interviews, or a blind date, or talking to their boss about a raise or whatever. All of those things because of that interaction with the endocannabinoid system. So Tylenol is psychotropic, just like THC. Oh my God.
So
but it's available at your grocery.
Yeah, I don't want all these young kids under 18 running down to pick up some Tylenol. Let me ask you, is that part of the reason why you have cough medicine and Tylenol cold medicines are taken off the shelf? Is that
no? But see, it doesn't get you high. So part of the misunderstanding, because the CB1 receptor was found with THC, there's this association then that the CB1 receptor gets you high. Okay. But it's not cause and effect, it's by association. So anandamide and 2-AG bind to those same receptors, and they don't get you high. You can't get high on your own endocannabinoids. You may have euphoria. You may be happy. You may start to laugh for no reason. But like I mentioned to you before, as an anesthesiologist, putting in an epidural in a woman who has intense labor pains, especially with the first baby, and you put in that epidural and the pain goes away, they go into a state of euphoria because you've just relieved their pain and anxiety and a whole bunch of things all at once. And there's this flood of neurochemistry. Okay, sometimes they want to name the baby after you. It's happened to me. It's like, what's your name? Oh my God, thank you so much. And they're angry at the husband because that's why they're pregnant, and they're in love with me because I just took away their pain. Taking away the pain of another human being.
So they try to pronounce your first name, then they go back to their husband's name, right?
That's why my name used to be Rumpelstiltskin, see, and then I shortened it. So, but it's that thing. So euphoria is not intoxication. It's not impairment. It doesn't mean that a person can't drive a car. Okay, so THC doesn't necessarily cause impairment, and that's for another conversation. Perfect. But it's quite possibly that the THC, when it gets transformed in the liver, just like acetaminophen gets transformed in the liver, it becomes this more potent molecule that leads to, like, when people eat a brownie and then they get way too high afterwards, it's not necessarily the THC that's causing that. It's this thing called 11-hydroxy-THC. So that's for the future. But just to realize what we think we know about, we often don't know. Columbus
learned a lot today. What's that?
Columbus thought he had found Indians, right? He thought he was in India when he got here. So, it's quite possible that we need to go up 30,000 feet, take a new view of the endocannabinoid system, and realize, we've discovered a new world, and it's not really what we thought. And that's what I like. I love discovery. I love, breaking old paradigms and championing the cause of the indigenous compounds, so that all of the contributors, everybody that's contributing to this well-being, to this bounty of life and nature, that they're all being recognized. Because when we appreciate all of it, then we have less of a tendency to kill off, wolves because they scare us, and less of a tendency to throw things in the ocean because it's so big, it's like a big toilet, and so it allows us to take better care of the environment that we rely on to take care of us. So health to me is a very, very big picture. It's as big as the whole planet.
Well, man, I enjoyed this. I really enjoyed this. So thank you
so much
for your time on here.
I enjoyed it too.
And Dr. Aliffe, I love it. And we'll get you back on here, and we'll take part 2, part 3 on some of these topics. But I thank you so much, and excited to get this out to our followers as well. I know they're going to enjoy this. And so, Dr. Aliffe, thank you very much. This is John Malanca with United
Thank
Patients.
you.
Be informed and be well, and we will see you all soon. Have a great day.
Happy New Year.
Hi, John Malanca here with United Patients Group. I hope you've enjoyed our videos. Please click like as well as subscribe to our channel here on YouTube. Also, follow us on Twitter at UPatients Group and on Facebook at United Patients Group, as well as for our podcast. Please click the link in the description below. We'll see you there. Bye-bye.